In a barren, devastated terrain, a young man's face twists in fury. He glares at a blonde swordswoman, roaring a vow at his adversary, Rufus lay lightless, that he will deliver the final strike. His promise goes unfulfilled. He lies dead on the fractured stones, eyes blankly gazing at the sky, while the victorious swordswoman and a companion loom over his lifeless form. The circumstances are undeniably dire, a future he cannot evade. His vision fractures. Rufus bolts upright in bed, the battle's memory still vivid. He tells himself that such a pathetic demise is unacceptable. It's an outcome that must never occur. Fueled by this foreboding, he dashes from his room. His butler Carlos calls out, inquiring about his destination. Without pausing, Rufus yells that they must rush to Roadbelt. He has to prevent this future from materializing. In the hallway, his expression hardens with determination. If that nightmare has even the slightest chance of becoming real, he swears to obliterate it entirely, using every resource at his command. The scene shifts to a day prior. Inside the lavish, lightless family manor, the young heir, Rufus Lee Lightless, sits lost in thought at a table. His personal butler Carlos approaches, teasing that a pout will ruin the boy's charming face. Rufus, irritated, insists he's already 12 and demands Carlos stop with the cute talk. The butler playfully counters that cuteness is justice. Pushed to his limit, Rufus coldly asks if Carlos wants this to be his last day. The butler responds with perfect poise, stating that a servant's life lasts only as long as their master's will. Rufus then asserts his own resolve, declaring he's always prepared to sacrifice his own short life for his cause. In a moment of maturity, Rufus states that being called cute is disrespectful, pointing out that he even drinks black coffee. As he sips, he privately savors the rich aroma, acknowledging the brewer's effort. From the doorway, Carlos observes his young master with a knowing smile. He hears his butler's dry comment, wondering aloud who would brew the young master's coffee if he were to die, calling the thought truly regrettable. After a brief pause, Rufus simply states his butler's name. In response, Carlos mockingly declares that, out of mercy, he would allow his master to live a long life. The young noble agrees, vowing to strive for a long and humble existence. One chided his butler, saying he nearly gave him a heart attack first thing in the morning. Carlos calmly replied that the young master had provoked him, adding that the last time he'd seen him this upset was when Rufus dismissed one of his magic instructors. The memory surfaced clearly. Rufus had waved dismissively, yelling that the instructor was fired, finding it absurd that someone so bold would dare to teach him. Back in the present, he conceded that the incident had indeed been quite rare. The butler's expression softened. Adjusting his tie, Carlos gently suggested that perhaps sharing the reason for his distress might lighten his mind, even a little. A small, knowing smile graced the young master's lips. He told Carlos that he had asked for it and warned him to brace for a story that was neither cute nor whimsical. The butler stood at attention, ready to listen as his young master prepared to share. The tale began with a simple, foreboding statement, his voice resonating over the image of his coffee cup. He had endured an endless and unpleasant dream. He recounted the narrative from his dream. It started with a commoner boy who enrolled in a magic academy rife with class prejudice. There, despite being scorned by arrogant, noble students, he and his friends faced a crisis that threatened their entire world. Ultimately, the boy triumphed, vanquishing the demon lords and the dark god behind the chaos, thus saving everyone. The hero's journey culminated in him marrying the kingdom's princess and ascending the throne to become its king. As the story wrapped up, Carlos stood with a gentle smile, his eyes shimmering. He remarked that it was quite a tale, filled with laughter and tears, much like a beloved adventure novel. On the table, the young master's cup was now empty. His butler's emotional reaction did little to ease the young master. Rufus, his face a mask of irritation, demanded coffee from Carlos, insisting that the dream he had was not entertaining at all. He explained that he had been forced to endure 5 entire chapters of a ludicrous commoner's rags-to-riches tale. As Carlos served him, the butler acknowledged that his master had a point. The butler, however, began offering a literary critique, suggesting the story's pacing could be improved, and that the first 2 chapters showed too much sympathy for the villain. He even added it would resonate more with the masses. This infuriated Rufus, who retorted by asking if Carlos was his editor and telling him to try writing a book himself. his fist clenched tightly as he prepared to reveal the true source of his anger. "Listen closely," he commanded, explaining why the narrative had focused so heavily on the villain's perspective. He erupted, stating it was because he himself had been cast as a petty, insignificant, villainous noble. Worse, he was killed off repeatedly in the most laughable ways imaginable. Upon hearing this, Carlos looked on with clear amusement, asking what sort of wicked deeds his master had committed. Rufus began to recount his roles. In the first chapter, he was a villainous noble who merely mocked the protagonist for being a commoner. Carlos recalled the scene. He then clarified that his role was even more minor. He was simply one of the main villain's lackeys, designated Lackey B. After that, he continued down the path of a minor villain. But in the second chapter, he reappeared as one of the 4 heavenly kings serving the second demon lord. His new identity was Shadow Wolf Rufus. Carlos was filled with admiration, exclaiming that his master had an excellent knack for names. The butler stroked his chin, a smirk spreading across his face as he summarized the situation. The Shadow Wolf fought valiantly, but met an unimpressive end midway through the chapter. He concluded that the young master was simply displeased at being cast as a villain who dies so early. His amusement was met with a sharp glare. Rufus's eyes narrowed as he issued a quiet warning. "You shouldn't be laughing either." He pointed a finger at his butler, explaining that since Carlos was merely the opening act in the dream, he had died even before Rufus did. With a flourish, he conferred upon him the title Dark Butler Carlos, a name the butler accepted with a proud pose. The butler was moved to tears, covering his mouth as he expressed his sheer joy at the thought of protecting his young master even within a dream. Rufus, however, flatly corrected him, stating that he hadn't been protected at all. They had both perished. With the matter settled, Carlos noted that his master's mood had improved and suggested they proceed with the day's agenda, to which Rufus simply agreed. As they prepared, Carlos outlined the day's plan from the Grand Manor, herbology practice in the garden that morning, followed by an economics lecture in the afternoon. While heading to the garden, their path was suddenly blocked by a massive fallen tree. Rufus questioned the site, and Carlos explained it was merely an old tree that had finally succumbed, blocking the path with remarkable neatness. A group of servants and gardeners had already gathered at the obstruction, their attention shifting towards the young lord as he arrived. One of them asked the gardener what was happening. One of the gardeners stepped forward to clarify the situation, informing Rufus that it would take a considerable amount of time to dismantle and relocate the tree. He suggested that the young master would need to take a detour through the woods, warning that his clothes might get dirty. The mention of a detour seemed to strike a nerve. Rufus's gaze hardened as he informed the startled gardener that the value of time for a noble like himself was vastly different from that of a commoner. Without another word, he leaped into the air, shouting a warning for the others to stand back. A shadowy, immense blade materialized in his grasp as he invoked its name, Darkside. The shadowy weapon descended with tremendous force, instantly obliterating the massive tree and sending splinters flying in every direction. He and Carlos walked away through a stone archway, leaving the servants behind. 2 of the maids watched them depart, one commenting on the incredible magic he displayed, though she couldn't help but notice his arrogant demeanor. As they watched, the gardener approached the maids, telling the one with her hair in buns that she was still a rookie. When she looked confused, he simply directed her gaze downward. Following his direction, they saw that the massive tree had been perfectly sectioned into uniform, firewood-sized logs. The servants were stunned, realizing he performed the feat not just for show, but to make their cleanup and reuse of the wood incredibly efficient. The gardener remarked that their lord was a difficult man to comprehend before ordering everyone to quickly haul the wood away. Meanwhile, as they walked along a stone path, Carlos gently advised his young master to perhaps show a bit more leniency when dealing with commoners. Rufus countered, questioning if he hadn't just made their work significantly faster. Carlos clarified that this was not quite what he meant, but the butler's words brought to mind a memory of a training session for the estate servants. In it, Carlos had explained to them that while the young master may seem arrogant and fixated on efficiency, he is, in truth, still just a boy. He had warned them, however, that such an attitude could easily earn him resentment from others. Returning to the present, he scoffed at the notion, declaring that he would never coddle them. He asserted that showing any softness to commoners would only invite them to take immediate advantage. Beside him, Carlos let out a weary sigh. His conviction is unwavering, rooted in a core belief. The duty of a noble is to safeguard the family name and ensure the prosperity of their land. This is why he dedicates himself so completely. While commoners toil for their living, he, as the heir to the marquisate, must study tirelessly to fulfill his noble responsibilities. His training is all-encompassing, covering not only rhetoric, language, and martial arts, but also the intricacies of economics, magic, and tedious practical etiquette. It is this deep-seated belief in duty and preparation that fuels his disdain for a certain kind of story. He internally questions what a mere commoner, possessing nothing but brute strength, could possibly contribute to saving the world. As night descends, a strange, dark particulate, resembling ash or countless black feathers, begins to drift down from the sky, blanketing the estate in an ominous shroud. In his private quarters, a young Rufus gazes out the window, dressed in a plain robe. The night air does little to calm his racing thoughts about a troubling, prophetic dream. He withheld the specifics from his butler, Carlos, yet the vision was too intricate to be brushed off as just a dream. His reflection reveals not who he is now, but who he is destined to become. His thoughts wander back to that tale, an absurd narrative set in the kingdom of Centuria, where a commoner ascends to power. He remembers distinct characters, including one who claims the title of the Second Demon Lord, Raymond Roy Noden's Galleon, and even the names of the 4 heavenly kings who served him. Propped up in bed, he contemplates the name Raymond. Though he has never encountered him, he knows he is meant to be the son of a duke. He wonders why someone like that would declare himself a demon lord, and, more troubling, why he would end up submitting to him in the store. He reclines again, thoughts racing. What could possibly change for him once he steps into the academy? As his eyelids grow heavy, a single disquieting question lingers. What is truly happening? Abruptly, the scene shifts. A young man with spiky hair yells his name, asking if there was another option, questioning a sacrifice made. The focus sharpens on a piercing eye, and realization strikes. This is the protagonist from yesterday's dream. The surroundings are desolate, a field of shattered pillars beneath a dull sky. He recognizes it immediately. It's a different angle, yet the same moment, the same scene from the dream's conclusion. Now he is his older self, the shadow wolf Rufus. With a look of utter revulsion, he shoves someone away, yelling for the commoner to keep his distance. The harsh truth dawns on him. He is living the dream right now. He realizes that if things continue this way, he will meet the same fate as in the dream. Determined to defy this destiny, he conjures a dark ball spell, convinced that his future self can't be defeated by something so feeble. But then, something feels off. The protagonist stares in disbelief, his mana draining rapidly before the fight can even commence. In a fragmented memory, Rufus lies motionless, parrying a strike from a blonde swordswoman. Frustration wells up inside him as he questions why he must maintain a facade and wonders if the Shadow Wolf persona is merely a foolish act. The battlefield comes into focus, revealing the fighters. Shadow Wolf, a young man named Abel, and a swordswoman, Farithiana. She is sharp and resolute. Every fiber of her being is concentrated on the impending strike, a faint aura enveloping her. He finds himself paralyzed, unable to defend himself. As she approaches, her face contorts with fury and confusion. She screams at him to halt, insisting she doesn't even recognize him. His composure crumbles, replaced by sheer primal terror. One thought consumes him. He does not want to die. The scene dissolves and the pain becomes tangible for Abel. He grips his head, crying out as phantom agony surges through him. How can this be happening in a dream? He looks on, pained, wondering if Rufus had any other options. A memory resurfaces. Abel stands against Rufus, warning him to stay back. Rufus recognizes the situation but notes that the initial move is different this time. He calmly conjures a massive dark scythe, declaring that this encounter will end now. The agony of that confrontation is unbearable. Abel screams, his body consumed by dark flames. The heat is excruciating, the stench of his own burning flesh overwhelming as a voice bellows for the Shadow Wolf to perish. The memory replays from another perspective. Abel recalls this moment as the absolute worst, questioning Rufus's choices again. This time, the cause of death differs, but is equally painful. Rufus falls to win magic, and with his final breath, he curses humanity as traitors he will never forgive. Another scene of defeat unfolds. Rufus is encircled by female warriors. One blames him for someone named Norn. Another condemns him for tormenting a village with heavy taxes. Wounded and resigned, Rufus admits he doesn't know who Norn is. He thinks of the woman who supported him, only to repeatedly attempt to kill him, grimly telling his executioners to finish it swiftly. The entire cycle feels utterly absurd. No matter how many times the dream recurred, the Shadow Wolf always faced defeat. He wonders why he must wait for his turn, feeling as if he's in some sort of game, musing that his dream self should have a healing potion. He questions if there's another way, silently warning an unseen summoner to stay away, feeling suffocated by their presence. Frustration arises from the memory of the onslaught. Surrounded, he is bombarded with insults. Nice robe loser, they mock him, calling him a creep with strange eyes. But their taunts are just meaningless noise. As he falls, he begins to lose all sense of reason, questioning if he is the one in the wrong, no longer knowing anything for sure. Rufus's consciousness dims within the memory. The psychic backlash crashes into Abel. He cries out, clutching his head, pleading for the repetitions to cease. He feels his body and soul being crushed to the smallest grain of dust. In a vision, Rufus's phantom seizes him, demanding to know what he desires from him. The overwhelming sensation leaves him curled on the ground, powerless against the torrent of another's suffering. Another voice from the memories slices through the chaos. Its owner stands firm, booted feet planted. Let me count it to clarify. The subject of the count is unmistakable. Shadows. The final tally is staggering. 200 quintillion. The sheer magnitude of that number seems to distort reality itself. A blur of incomprehensible loss stretches into the void. The weight of that number, representing all those deaths, settled upon him as his eyes fluttered open. Lying in bed, he stared blankly at the ceiling, his gaze vacant and weary, a simple choker resting around his neck. He awoke not to darkness, but to the familiar confines of his family's grand estate, morning light filtering through the clouds. The return to consciousness was jarring. He tumbled from his bed, crashing to the floor of his lavish room with a pained cry. His body throbbed, his mind clouded with terror. With a shaking hand, he pushed himself up, his voice a faint whisper as he called out for someone. His call was met. The door burst open and his butler Carlos rushed to his side, concern etched on his face. From the doorway, another young man observed the scene unfold. Staring at the familiar face, the boy sought confirmation, his voice trembling as he asked if it was truly Carlos. The butler knelt, his expression softening with reassurance. He confirmed his identity, stating that he, Carlos, his personal butler, was right there. That confirmation was all it took. The boy's composure shattered, and a wave of anguish washed over his face. The anguish erupted into a raw, desperate wail. He screamed his butler's name, tears streaming down his face as the full weight of his remembered horrors crashed down. He lunged forward, burying his face in Carlos's uniform, his small hands gripping the fabric. "I don't want to die anymore," he sobbed, the plea torn from his throat, a desperate cry against a fate he had endured countless times. An hour passed, the storm of tears subsiding, leaving a fragile calm. Carlos held the boy, who was now just sniffling softly, his body still trembling with the aftershocks of his terror. The butler's expression was one of deep pity for his young master. He pressed his face deeper into the butler's chest, inhaling deeply. The sudden movement and the sound of sniffing startled Carlos. Pulling back slightly, the boy looked up at his butler with newfound clarity in his eyes. He simply stated that Carlos smelled of smoke. Carlos, the butler, appeared flustered, his face damp. He muttered to himself in embarrassment about being used as a handkerchief before his work hours had even begun. His young master, Rufus, now resembling a young adult, regarded him with a faint, knowing smile. He praised Carlos for his loyalty, noting that he would rush to his side even off duty if he showed any sign of distress. The butler, observing him, thought to himself that Rufus seemed to have recovered. He continued, explaining that seeing Rufus, usually so confident, shaken has startled the other servants as well. As if to emphasize his point, two maids peek at Rufus from behind a partially open door down the hall. His attention snaps to them, and he shouts in embarrassment for them to return to their duties. The maids apologize and quickly retreat, one thinking his flushed face is adorable, while the other wishes she could comfort him. Rufus quietly reflects that it's fortunate his parents are away, as his cries were likely loud enough to echo throughout the mansion. He turns away from Carlos and strides toward his bedroom, dismissing the entire incident. He insists it was nothing, that it wasn't funny, and that he merely had a nightmare. The butler follows him to the doorway, remarking that having nightmares 2 nights in a row is quite unfortunate. Standing by his bed, Rufus quietly affirms yes. But the one truly experiencing the event knows it was far more than a nightmare. It was an ordeal of countless deaths, an endless pain that nearly caused him to lose his very sense of self. Back in the room, Carlos places a steadying hand on Rufus's shoulder. He tells him that what he endured cannot be labeled a dream. With a hardened expression, Rufus agrees, clarifying that it was an experience. His hands clench the fabric of his robe, a silent testament to the burden of that experience. He stands still as Carlos adjusts his formal attire, his mind consumed by a chilling thought. If that experience, his death, were to become reality, he quickly dismisses this dark fate, asserting he has no duty to follow the path dictated by that shop. His face hardens with determination. Instead of succumbing to such a pathetic conclusion, he resolves to fight back, regardless of how disgraceful it may seem. He starts to dissect the vision's events, pondering the variables. Would he have succeeded with more mana? Would the outcome shift if he weren't a villainous noble or one of the 4 heavenly kings he had to battle? While he contemplates these scenarios, Carlos shares vital information. The tale kicks off in 3 years when the characters enroll in the Magic Academy. Rufus wonders if simply steering clear of the protagonist could alter his fate, but quickly dismisses the notion as overly simplistic. His mind drifts back to a detail from the vision, a female sailor commanding a water spirit. She had yelled at him, accusing the lightless family of oppressing her village with exorbitant taxes. The woman's words resonate in his mind, providing a clear motive for her actions. She harbored a deep-seated grudge. The thought lingers as he sits at the table. He sips from his cup and calls for his butler, voicing his concerns about the heavy taxes. Carlos approaches, asking if the warm milk isn't to his taste. The young master is taken aback by the butler's insight, realizing Carlos is right. Setting aside his surprise, he gives Carlos a straightforward command. He wants to know if any villages in the lightless territory are burdened by heavy taxes. Carlos agrees to look into it, but mentions their domain's taxes aren't particularly high compared to others. Rufus feels momentarily annoyed at being treated like a child. He sits in thought, recalling a specific detail from his future story. It involved taxes and a fishing village, one so tormented by marauding sea monsters that it could no longer pay its dues. As he mechanically cuts into his meal, a thought crystallizes: the village's name. If he could remember it, that name might connect his dreadful dream to reality. He struggles to grasp the memory, muttering fragments to himself. His butler Carlos overhears and questions the name. Rogue Belt? He asks, confirming it is indeed a small fishing village within the Lightless family's territory. The confirmation hits him like a bolt. His eyes widen in shock and a manic grin spreads across his face as the truth dawns on him. The fishing village of Rogue Belt truly exists. Carlos, puzzled, wonders why he would care about the taxes of such a minor place. The moment of intensity fades, leaving Rufus staring at his plate. It felt like grasping at clouds with only a dream as a clue. Noticing his odd behavior, Carlos expresses concern, asking if he feels unwell and offering to reschedule his plans. But Rufus understands this is more than just a dream. If a village name he couldn't possibly know aligns with reality, then the future he witnessed, where he dies, feels alarmingly tangible. This chilling realization propels him into action. He leaps from his seat and rushes past his butler, calling for Carlos. They must head to Rogue Belt immediately. As he races down the stairs, Carlos scrambles to catch up, pleading for him to pause. The butler insists the plan is impractical, listing the essentials for such a journey: a coachman, guards, and, most importantly, permission from Lord Lightless. Rufus brushes off his concerns, stating he will inform his father afterward. He commands Carlos to act as both coachman and guard. Knowing he can't reveal the true reason without being dismissed as mad, he presses on. Carlos protests vehemently, insisting he must at least notify the Lord, but Rufus is already gone, urgently calling his butler's name. He glances back at his butler, claiming a sudden craving for fresh fish, effective immediately. The excuse is flimsy, but Carlos, realizing he has overstepped, bows his head in agreement. He promises to prepare for the journey right away. With a simple command, Rufus sends him off. As his butler walks down the long, shadowy hall, a dark resolve solidifies within Rufus. He views his life and possessions as solely his own. No one, not even a god, would be forgiven for taking what belongs to him without consent. A grim realization follows. His own death, as foretold in the vision, would also mean Carlos's demise. His expression hardens, fierce determination igniting in his eyes. He refuses to be a passive victim. He vows to strike first against fate, even if it's just by a second, to rewrite the future and avert his own end. Rufus had a dream, though he viewed it more as a prophetic tale. In this vision, he would meet a disgraceful end at the hands of commoners in 3 years. Unwilling to remain idle for that long, he resolved to alter his future, embarking on a 4-day carriage journey to the frontier village of Robel. As the journey continued, he sensed something unusual in the air. It carried the scent of the sea. He and Carlos walked along a cliffside path overlooking the water, their carriage laden with supplies trailing closely behind. They paused to consult a large map confirming their location. This, he stated, was Rogue Belt, or so the map indicated. Before them lay their destination, the frontier fishing village of Rogue Belt, a small settlement nestled against the shore at the base of towering cliffs. As they entered the village streets, Rufus was struck by an unsettling silence. There were far too few people around. This was Rogue Belt from his vision. In that tale, the village was beleaguered by heavy taxes, yet there were certainly more inhabitants than this. He replayed a key event from the prophecy. The story's protagonist visits this very village to slay sea monsters, where he meets a woman who joins his crew. His memory sharpened, and he recognized her with a jolt. It was none other than that wild woman sailor who was the first to take his head in his vision of the future. Standing in the empty street, his resolve solidified. He now understood that Rogue Belt was a crucial link between the story and reality. He couldn't return empty-handed. He found himself thinking about food, specifically fish, as Carlos pointed out an inn. Carlos gently reminded the young master that he was breaking character, a comment that seemed to pull Rufus from his reverie. Following his butler's lead, they approached the establishment. Rufus dryly remarked that all the buildings resembled doghouses to him, but acknowledged Carlos's fine taste. Inside, the inn was silent and empty, save for a man slumped over the wooden counter, fast asleep. Carlos announced their presence, and the man began to stir with a growl. The innkeeper awoke with a start, immediately hostile. Mistaking them for debt collectors, he shouted that there was nothing left in his shop. Carlos, ever composed, apologized for the intrusion and clarified that his master simply had some questions for the owner. The innkeeper looked on, bewildered by the term. His gaze then fell upon Rufus, scoffing and calling the boy a brat, questioning why they would allow a child like him to roam. In response to the insult, Carlos's demeanor shifted to one of immense pride. He presented young Rufus with a flourish, declaring that his master was a fine person deserving of respect. The butler then leaned in to quietly inform Rufus that this was typical behavior from untrained commoners. The innkeeper, overhearing, retorted that Carlos had a slave's mentality. Rufus simply acknowledged that he understood. Changing the subject, Carlos formally requested information about the village's dire state. The innkeeper hesitated, stating that such information came at a cost. With a knowing smirk, Rufus produced a heavy pouch of coins, coolly observing that the man was a slave to money. The innkeeper's face twisted with rage at the boy's sharp-tongued accusation. Before the man could explode, a young woman rushed from a back room, pleading for her father to stop. The innkeeper's anger shifted to shock as he saw her, calling out her name, Lilia, and demanding to know why she wasn't hidden as he had instructed. She threw herself onto the wooden floor, bowing so low her forehead nearly touched the planks. In a trembling voice, she desperately apologized for her father's rudeness, pleading for forgiveness on their behalf. Her desperate apology was met with fury from her father, who shouted from behind the bar that she must not bow to them. Lilia, still prostrate, insisted that he should bow too, explaining that these visitors were different from the usual ones. The suddenness of her bow made a soft popping sound. Carlos, flustered, addressed her as young lady, while Rufus coolly observed the farce, wondering if their words were even being heard. In response to the chaos, Rufus stepped forward. He calmly placed his polished boot on the back of Lilia's head, pressing her face firmly into the floorboards. The act stunned Carlos and the innkeeper into silence. At that moment, the door burst open and a group of concerned villagers armed with farming tools rushed in, demanding to know what the shouting was about. Their eyes fell upon the scene and one cried out Lilia's name in alarm. The villagers, led by the innkeeper, completely misinterpreted the situation. One shouted that the depraved old bastard was trying to make Lilia lick his boots, while another noted that the old man, the innkeeper, was also armed. Rufus simply looked on, confused by the accusation. The innkeeper's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. He was a fiend, an ogre. He stammered that he would never do such a thing. Frantically, he rushed past the pair, shouting that he was merely the lackey. The real boss, he declared, was the short one. The other villagers reacted with stunned silence. Rufus pinched the bridge of his nose, a headache blooming from the sheer absurdity. He wondered if he was surrounded by short-sighted fools. The villagers, now directing their anger at him, shouted that they wouldn't go easy on a kid and accused him of being a goon sent by someone named Clinton. He processed their words, his mind making a crucial connection. Rogue Belt's local magistrate. He concluded it must be Clinton F.A.U. Serpent. A sudden memory jolts him from the dream. He vividly remembers the magistrate of Robelt imposing harsh taxes, causing the people's suffering. This led to his eventual hatred and demise. With newfound clarity, he speaks to the crowd, urging them to find someone who can communicate like a human and share everything. His authoritative voice only fuels the villagers' anger. One man shouts, calling him a conceited brat. The crowd murmurs angrily. A burly man notices Rufus's confident stance and realizes this boy might actually be a true noble. Greg steps forward, wearing a soothing smile. He warns the crowd that any harm to the boy will cost them dearly. The muscular man greets the newcomers with a cocky grin, pointing out their noble status but lack of manners. He proposes a deal. He'll protect them if they release Lilia. He offers a late apology, introducing himself as Greg, the sailor's leader. Rufus studies him closely, noting his cautious stance, half-turned body, hand on his sword, and eyes fixed on Carlos. Butler Carlos evaluates Greg. He recognizes the man's rudeness but appreciates his caution, thinking a proper discussion might be feasible now. Rufus remains alert, watching Greg's hand near his weapon. In response to the demand, Rufus states clearly that he never restrained the girl. Lilia, who had been cowering, lets out a small yelp at his words. He turns to the startled Lilia, calmly asking for her left hand. As she nervously complies, a vivid memory floods Rufus, himself as a child, holding a much younger Lilia's hand. The memory deepens, taking him back to a grand childhood ball. He sees himself dancing with Lilia, while a younger Greg and other villagers look on. He recalls Greg's past remark about him being aloof yet a true gentleman. The collection snaps back to reality as Greg groans in frustration, calling Rufus unbearable. Lilia stands beside him, smiling gently while the villagers watch in confusion. Despite his annoyance, the sailor grins, noting that Rufus shows no hostility towards him or his people. Rufus thinks stirring up trouble and wiping out a village would be too much hassle. Rufus Lay, lightless, accurately perceives the tense atmosphere, commoners surrounding a noble with open hostility. Across from him, Greg wears a defiant smirk, his eyes narrowed. He explains the kingdom's law. Violence against nobility isn't just disrespect, it's treason. Such acts lead to the execution of the offenders and their families. Greg scoffs at this law, feigning admiration. He asks if tears and gratitude would satisfy the young noble. Rufus curtly replies that while Greg's head holds no value, it still deserves a bow. The command leaves the large man momentarily speechless. His name is Clinton. He seems genuinely taken aback that a simple bow is all that's required. Upon hearing this name, Rufus's demeanor shifts. He clarifies that he does have a demand. Before their conversation is interrupted, he wants Greg to tell him about Clinton, the local magistrate of Robelt. He leans in, his question sharp and to the point. Are the villagers at odds with the magistrate? Greg reacts in disbelief, as if the answer should be obvious. His expression hardens with rage. He bellows that if Clinton dares to return to the village, they will risk their lives to kill him. Rufus observes this outburst coolly, noting they've gone from commoners to barbarians. Greg agrees. He continues, bitterness lacing his voice, explaining that Clinton permits his men to loot the village under the pretense of tax collection. When there's nothing left, he resorts to kidnapping. Greg rhetorically asks if that isn't savage enough to rival their own barbers. His words linger, followed by a heavy silence. A woman's voice shatters the moment, calling out Greg's name. He turns away from Rufus, waving his hand in embarrassment. "Whoops," he says, realizing this isn't the kind of talk to have in front of a child before heading up the stairs. The intense discussion with the villagers is interrupted by a young man bursting in with a warning. Clinton's thugs have arrived. As Greg prepares to confront them, he instructs the old man, Carlos, to protect Rufus if the weapon on his belt is functional. With a grim expression, Greg charges into the fray. What danger brings to mind his recent exchange? Greg had scoffed at the notion of taking their petition directly to the Lord. In response, Rufus had coolly suggested that if they were ready to lay down their lives, they should petition House Lightless directly. Greg doesn't fully grasp the stakes. Standing beside Carlos, Rufus reflects on a harsh truth. Ignorance is a crime. Below this thought, a vision of countless bodies illustrates the brutal consequences of such naive thinking. The grim reality outside unfolds as expected. The ringleader of Clinton's men bellows orders to seize all valuables and kill anyone who resists. From the crowd, Greg roars back defiantly, dismissing the demand as nonsense. His defiance is met with immediate violence. The thugs descend upon the villagers, mercilessly striking down those who resist. One man, insisting he has nothing left, is brutally punched by a soldier who asks if he still has blood to spare. Watching the chaos from a nearby window, Rufus calmly turns to his butler. He asks Carlos if he remembers the law stating that forced collection must follow proper procedures. Carlos confirms this, stating that what they witness is not tax collection but outright robbery. His quiet analysis is violently interrupted as the door to their room is kicked open with a loud crash. In the end, the source of the commotion becomes clear. Agun has found Lilia hiding and calls out to his captain. Her father, the innkeeper, desperately offers the family silver, pleading for them to leave his daughter alone as she cries out for him. The sounds of terror sharpen his focus. With a thoughtful expression, Rufus leans his head on his hand and begins to pose a hypothetical question to his butler. Inside the ransacked inn, Carlos contemplates the situation. He asks if it would be feasible for him to deal with Clinton personally, but quickly concedes that it would require the Lord's approval. From the window above, young Rufus observes the scene. He reflects that if he, the heir, were to act independently, it could be misinterpreted as blaming the Lord for appointing the official in the first place. Carlos advises that the correct approach is to gather evidence, submit a report, and then take appropriate action. Internally, he feels pride, noting that the next head of House Lightless can already differentiate between recklessness and orderly governance. However, the situation below worsens as one of Clinton's thugs spots Lilia and shouts for his men to forget the old man and strip them of their valuables. He grabs Lilia, declaring he'll inspect her himself to see if she's worth selling. As she screams for help, Rufus trembles with suppressed rage. Stepping forward with determination, Carlos declares that he will handle this himself. He positions himself between Rufus and the intruders, ordering the knave to back off. Carlos asserts that his young master is so exalted that even mere bandits approaching him is an act of presumption. Greg bristles at being labeled a bandit. Carlos coolly replies that if they aren't bandits, they are simply vermin. From behind him, Rufus realizes with a start that his butler is deliberately provoking them. As expected, an armored thug charges forward, sword raised, shouting that the Dark Nobles are the ones backing them. The sword connects, striking Carlos across the face. The thug questions his insolence, reminding him that House Lightless supports their actions. As Carlos stumbles back, Rufus watches in horror, realizing his butler has truly put himself in harm's way. Stunned, he touches a finger to his cheek. He looks at the blood on his fingertip, eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Blood, he thinks. He lies on the ground where he has fallen, a trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth, and calmly states, "I see." Master Rufus's expression twists into a cold, menacing smile. He addresses the thugs, his voice dangerously low, accusing them of injuring his loyal servant, and on top of that, tarnishing the name of Lightless. Their actions provide ample reason to crush Clinton. As he speaks, a massive, shadowy hand erupts from the ground. its dark fingers closing around one of the armored men. Rufus names the technique Dark Hand and adds that they might as well deal with the rest while they're at it. The shadowy appendage violently hurls the captured thug through the wall of a nearby building. His comrades cry out his name in shock as he is sent flying. He crashes outside. The furious captain regains his feet and bellows orders to the men still in the street. Kill those two. Later, as they walk away from the ensuing brawl, Rufus remarks to his butler that it was quite an entertaining little performance. He asks the young master if they should finish them all off. Rufus, with a slight smile, instructs him to keep it moderate. Meanwhile, back in the street, Greg lands a solid punch on one of the thugs, who cries out as the blow connects. From a high vantage point, Rufus shares his thoughts. With savages on both sides, distinguishing them is impossible, and they can't risk harming villagers. Below, a fierce battle rages. Two armored knights strike with precision while Greg continues his relentless bare-knuckle fight. Carlos observes the chaos from a rooftop, his face set in concentration. Carlos darts forward, evading a wild sword swing and sending another armored soldier crashing to the ground. He unleashes a powerful wave, a single sweeping motion that sends private soldiers scattering like autumn leaves. The alley is strewn with the fallen forms of Clinton's men. Greg stands among the defeated, disbelief etched on his face, astonished that the old man achieved this alone. He turns to young Master Rufus, who has been watching nearby, and apologizes for the brutal display. The boy simply replies that he doesn't mind. Admiration fills his gaze, a small smile tugging at his lips. He recalls his butler's past as the former captain of the Dark Knights of House Lightless, acknowledging Carlos's enduring skill. Meanwhile, Greg urgently commands the last retreating soldiers to fall back. They must carry a message back to their master, Clinton. Defiance sparks among the villagers, who raise their tools and fists in solidarity. Greg proclaims they will no longer endure oppression and will confront the Lord directly. Rufus smirks from the sidelines, noting the complexity of such a direct appeal. As the villagers march away, Carlos questions Rufus about allowing the soldiers to escape. Rufus confirms the choice, explaining their destination is Clinton's manor. Next to a waiting carriage, his expression sharp and calculating, he observes the villagers' march, which conveniently simplifies their plans. By the coast, he gazes at the water when a strange vortex appears in the sky, an unsettling sensation washing over him, making him question its source. The sensation grows stronger. He recognizes it as a magical wave, a force pulling him down like the ocean's depths. A sound from the water triggers a dreadful realization. Could it be that creature? His mind races, linking the disturbance to a specific event, the emergence of a sea monster, which shouldn't occur for another 3 years. He grimly wonders if his attempts to alter the future have inadvertently caused this early arrival. In response to his fears, a massive form begins to rise from the depths. It's one of the Demon King's feared vassal beasts, the sea demon Stray. A voice emerges from the shadows, questioning the young master. Rufus stands alone on a grassy bluff, his long coat billowing in the wind as he gazes at the expansive sea. From the carriage, his butler Carlos watches with a knowing smile, asking if Rufus is hesitant to leave the sea or simply craving exotic food. During the journey, Rufus realizes Carlos couldn't sense the earlier magical disturbance. He dismisses him as a carefree fool, vowing never to return to this town. Elsewhere, a subordinate confirms they are heading to Clinton's residence to gather evidence. With a confident smirk, Rufus sits with arms crossed, anticipating the confrontation. He thinks of Clinton F.E.U. Serpent and wonders what excuse the man will concoct this time. At the Clinton estate in Viperport Harbor Town, he settles into an opulent room. His expression darkens with disdain as a single thought crosses his mind. This is utterly dull. As he lounges on the grand sofa, his internal monologue continues. He reflects on the accusations tarnishing House Lightless's noble name, even suggesting looting. He feigns ignorance, thinking he knows nothing of such matters. In response, the local magistrate, Clinton F.E.U. Serpent, appears with a dismissive wave and a slick smile. He claims the incident was caused by tax collectors acting without permission and eagerly promises to find them and bring their heads to Rufus. Internally, Rufus scoffs at the polished excuse, thinking that sacrificing subordinates is a lizard's trick, unworthy of a slippery snake like Lynn. Out loud, he cuts to the chase, demanding to know why tax collection is lagging. He commands Clinton to speak plainly. The magistrate leans back with a condescending demeanor, starting his explanation by claiming the peasant's excuses are absurd beyond belief. Clinton FEU's serpent's explanation elicits a jolt from Rufus. He realizes that the villagers' fishing troubles due to monsters mirror the exact situation from the story he knows. A chilling thought follows. This wasn't supposed to happen for another 3 years. He remains silent, lost in thought, as Clinton continues, skeptically remarking that he has never heard of a mass monster outbreak occurring outside a dungeon. He focuses intently. He recalls the story's details, remembering how the heroes reacted upon learning of the monster outbreak. Events unfold as they did in the tale. The culprit is the colossal demon Kraken Strafe, a beast that had wreaked havoc off Robelt's coast, proving a formidable foe even for the two protagonists. A memory flashes through his mind, a powerful, decisive strike used to finally defeat it. It all boiled down to one thing: massive armament. In short, it required a vast sum of money. He knew that in the original story, the king's support during the revival of the demon lords made it possible, but now he would have to gather the funds himself. He hears a door creak open, followed by a familiar voice announcing, "I've returned, young master." Carlos enters, but he isn't addressing Rufus. Instead, he speaks to another man with a goatee, informing him that he has acquired the requested items. Before he can elaborate on the situation in the next room and the basement below, where two figures are chained, the goateed man interrupts. He chastises Carlos for his tardiness, emphasizing that they can't afford to waste any more time. Rufus, standing nearby, overhears the entire conversation. He listens closely, his expression unreadable as he brings a gloved hand to his chin. The information about captives in the basement and the urgency in the men's voices swirling in his mind. A slow knowing smile spreads across his face. A plan is forming. In a lavishly decorated room, young Rufus Lightless sits calmly on a sofa, addressing the local magistrate, Clinton. He remarks that while everything has been dull so far, it's about to get interesting, causing a flustered Clinton to stammer in response. Unauthorized taxation, embezzlement, looting, and kidnapping. Rufus states that his servant has just secured evidence of all these crimes, causing both Clinton and his goateed companion to react with visible shock. As panic sets in, Clinton's fear quickly shifts to a smug grin. He thinks to himself that this level of exposure was within his expectations. With enough money, he believes he can recover from this setback. However, his confidence is immediately challenged. Rufus reveals knowledge of a stash of illicit funds hidden in the basement, including solid gold statues. He pointedly asks if Clinton would mind if he took custody of everything underground. The magistrate, now sweating and panicked, stammers that he knows nothing of such matters. The magistrate's composure crumbles completely. A bead of sweat trickles down his temple as his eyes widen in pure, unadulterated panic. His panic transforms into a surge of possessive rage as the reality of the situation sinks in. He grits his teeth, thinking of the hard-earned savings he accumulated through so much effort. He refuses to accept this outcome. With a snarl twisting his features, Clinton furiously declares that he will never allow some brat to steal his fortune. A loud crash echoes through the room as he extends his arm in a commanding gesture. Rufus remains seated, completely unfazed, while his butler, Carlos, stands impassively behind him. Turning his attention to the goateed man, Rufus politely inquires about the hand he raised. He then calmly asks Carlos about the armed men in the next room. In the adjacent room, a dozen of Clinton's armed staff lie unconscious on the floor. Rufus explains that they are all fast asleep. With a chilling smile, he informs the goateed man that this was a clear attempt to assassinate a high noble, an act of insolence punishable by death. In the next room, a dozen of Clinton's armed guards are sprawled out, unconscious. Rufus grins, explaining they're all in a deep slumber. With a sinister smile, he tells the man with the goatee that this was a blatant assassination attempt on a high noble, an act of defiance that could lead to immediate execution. A wave of dread washed over Clinton as the full pronouncement hit him, his face twisting in terror. A tear mingled with sweat as he faced the grim truth. He was about to die. The magistrate dropped to his knees, begging for mercy and offering all his riches in return. The man with the goatee, beside Rufus, sharply rebuffed him, stating that House Lightless couldn't be bought. Yet Rufus paid no attention to the outburst. His mind was already elsewhere. With Clinton's wealth secured, the next priority was to acquire weapons. He understood that arms trading was tightly controlled by the crown, but someone like Clinton, who had dealt in both loot and lives for gold, must have connections in the black market. A new opportunity arose. Perhaps this man could still prove useful. A thought flickered in his mind. A faint, desperate plea for mercy echoed softly in the lavish room. In reply, Rufus offered a faint smile. He looked down at the pleading man and agreed, saying he would grant him a chance. This unexpected shift left the goatee man stunned. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple as he reminded his young master that their plan was to expose Clinton's crimes to his father. However, Rufus was overjoyed. Clinton looked up, his face glowing with sycophantic admiration for Rufus's kindness. He claimed it was a noble act, beyond the reach of ordinary folk, and eagerly inquired what he needed to do. With an almost saintly expression, Rufus laid out his conditions. He acknowledged the task would be challenging, but if Clinton succeeded, all his past misdeeds would be wiped clean. The promise of complete absolution was all Clinton needed. He shouted his agreement with joy, declaring he would do anything. Sensing the man's desperation, Rufus noted the spirit and began to give his orders. He calmly issues his orders to the kneeling magistrate. Clinton's mission is to eliminate the monsters terrorizing Rogue Belt and rescue the town. Before Clinton could fully grasp the command, Rufus asked for a pen and paper. The magistrate looked up confused, questioning the existence of monsters and dismissing it as peasant nonsense. The magistrate's doubts were irrelevant. A memory of a younger Rufus surfaced, diligently writing as he pondered his philosophy. If there were no monsters, he reasoned, the situation was even more advantageous. The true goal was to uphold the principle of nobility, to project the image of a noble standing with the people in their time of need. Kneeling on the floor, Clinton stared in disbelief at the extensive list of demands before him. Personnel, weapons, ships, ammunition. The sheer magnitude of the request was overwhelming. A single sheet of paper fell carelessly beside him. He was sweating, muttering that it was impossible, but the order was absolute. He had to use bribes or back channels, whatever it took to gather everything. They were leaving tomorrow morning. As the command became clear, Carlos loomed over the magistrate, the tip of a blade held threateningly close. Nearby, the young Rufus Lightless watched with crossed arms. Carlos warned Clinton that if he failed to comply, he could simply die here. Terrified, Clinton scrambled to his feet, vowing to prepare everything immediately. As they left, the young master turned to his butler, questioning the look on his face. Carlos simply addressed him formally. The older man, visibly flustered, could only wonder where the boy had learned such devious tactics. Later, standing by a window, Rufus asked Carlos if he planned to inform his father of their actions. He pointed out that since they had already snuck out, it was a bit late for that. Carlos quietly acknowledged the truth. Carlos decided to stay with him a bit longer, confidently stating that his father would judge based on results. With a bow, the loyal butler accepted the order. Rufus's resolve solidified. He was the only one who could take action. Assuming the cause of the poor fishing was already present, he would use whatever means necessary, even dirty money, to see his mission through. The next morning, attention shifted to the coastal town of Roqueba. The sun rose over the seaside settlement, its buildings clustered against the cliffs. On the shores of the coastal town, a woman and a small child stood near the trees, gazing out at the vast empty sea. The child pointed excitedly, exclaiming about the size and number of the approaching objects. The mother looked on, her expression one of pure shock. On the horizon, a fleet of enormous sailing ships sliced through the waves, their white sails gleaming under the midday sun. From the tree line, a young man with a dark bandana wondered aloud if nobles were attacking from the sea this time. He shouted in alarm and sprinted down the hill toward the woman and child. He crouched beside the little girl, who seemed to have fallen. With concern, he asked if she was hurt and could walk. The girl simply confirmed her name. This brought a wide, proud grin to his face. He praised her for her strength, declaring that was what it meant to be a kid from Roqueville. He then turned to lead the mother and child away, suggesting it was time for a game of hide and seek, warning them not to let anyone from outside the village find them. As he saw them off, he paused, his expression hardening into a grim stare as he looked back toward the approaching fleet. On a rooftop, a figure with a long staff steadied himself. He didn't care if they were nobles or not. They would not set foot on this land. He vowed to protect everyone this time. The fleet halted, anchoring just off the coast of the port town. A small boat sliced through the calm waters, carrying Rufus Lightless and his butler, Carlos. The older man broke the silence, noting they had never planned to return, but fate seemed intent on bringing them back. Rufus, gazing toward the shore with a weary expression, agreed it was a nuisance, but acknowledged they would need someone familiar with these waters. As their boat neared the wooden pier, they spotted a lone figure standing guard. Rufus observed that the locals appeared wary of them. He remained unconcerned, thinking that once the townspeople saw their faces, things would settle down. On the wooden pier, Greg greeted Rufus with a broad, relieved smile. He noted that Rufus was the first to arrive, questioning his sudden disappearance the previous day and his unannounced return. Speaking up, Carlos stepped forward, placing a hand on Rufus's shoulder. He explained to a bewildered Greg that they had come to address the source of the problem preventing the villagers from paying their taxes: the monsters. Greg found the situation sudden and confusing, asking if Rufus had brought his entire fleet just for monster extermination. With a confident smile, Rufus clarified that his goal was not mere extermination, but the total annihilation of every last creature. He advised the villagers to simply stay hidden. Greg shook his head, admitting that until yesterday he had despised all nobles, but now saw Rufus as different. He then asked why Rufus cared so much for their village. Rufus replied cryptically, suggesting it was likely because he had strangled a rare talking snitch. His explanation was abruptly interrupted as a figure charged down the pier toward them. It was the Roque belt protector, wielding a long staff and shouting about the snake Rufus had mentioned. Greg turned around in shock. The protector swung his staff down in a powerful overhead strike aimed at Rufus. Before it could connect, Carlos intervened, drawing 2 blades to block the attack. Rufus sharply commanded him to stop. With swift precision, the butler disarmed the attacker. The wooden staff flew from the protector's hands, shattering against the pier's planks as the young man stumbled forward. Off balance, the protector continued his forward momentum, his eyes wide with surprise. Rufus watched his approach with a sharp, unwavering gaze. Their silhouettes clashed in a blur of motion. From his side, Carlos shouted in alarm, calling out for his young master. The young master stood his ground, head slightly bowed. Rufus calmly stated that he was fine and ordered Carlos not to interfere. The protector met Rufus's cold, unwavering stare, a trace of blood on his lower lip. Internally, he acknowledged a misstep. He had become overconfident. The opponent quickly assessed the situation. He sensed a chilling killing intent from the young noble, an aura no child should possess. He recalled how Rufus had charged from afar, displayed incredible agility, and aimed directly for their leader. The protector held his ground as Greg rushed forward, bellowing in disbelief. He furiously demanded to know what the fool was doing attacking the very person who had saved their village. Meanwhile, Rufus observed the unfolding drama, questioning the title of savior. The accusation seemed to confirm a suspicion for Full. "That's right," he murmured, a sudden understanding dawning on him. "I figured as much." A new determination settled in his eyes. "In that case," Full declared with a sharp grin, "that's all the more reason we can't let you into the village." Rufus met the hostility with a placid smile, remarking on the ungrateful reception for a savior. Unfazed, he raised a hand. "Very well," he conceded. "I'll hear you out." Greg begs a young man named Fole to halt, while another attendant urges him not to get involved. Fole, however, disregards them, yelling that it's insufficient as he charges at the lifeless Rufus. He accuses Rufus of deceiving the villagers, a claim Rufus calmly challenges while noting how much everyone has transformed. The assault is unyielding, yet Rufus effortlessly evades every strike. Fulgro grows more exasperated, lamenting that even his father and Lilia now praise Rufus as a noble. He struggles to find a weakness in the young lord's defense. Having created some space, Rufus confronts his assailant, asserting that he drove away the corrupt tax collectors. If that doesn't qualify him as a good noble, he demands to know what does. He fixes his gaze on the flustered villager, asking directly what defines a good noble. Faced with the straightforward question, Fole hesitates before awkwardly suggesting that perhaps a good noble is someone who doesn't impose taxes. A certain answer lingers in the air as they stand facing each other on the tranquil shore. The silence shatters with a single decisive step. Rufus scoffs at the notion, dismissing it as a day out. Lance is on Fole, who is taken aback by the sudden movement. Rufus declares he will reveal the truth, questioning if Fole thinks roads and bridges just appear out of thin air. A good noble, he begins to clarify, is something entirely different. His words are punctuated by a sudden, swift action. Rufus leaps and delivers a powerful kick to Foal's torso, shouting that what the villagers truly desire isn't a good noble, but one that serves their convenience. The force sends Foal flying. Foal is sent reeling, while Rufus remains composed, his mind already analyzing the encounter. He concludes that Foal is no ordinary opponent. His movements are unnatural. Still, he feels confident he has gauged his rival's limits. Over the fallen villager, his companions approach. Greg, unimpressed, comments on the boy's poor manners. Carlos offers an explanation, noting that Foal is the youngest of 3 brothers and perhaps a bit spoiled. On the ground, Foal's mind is consumed by a single burning thought, a command to never forgive. Memories spiral into pain. A young girl, Leung, stands amidst chaos, her face a mask of sorrow as she asks if anyone has forgotten her. The memory is filled with hatred, a vow to never forgive Clinton, never forgive the name Lightless, and never forgive the nobility. Fueled by this resurrected fury, Foal begins to push himself back up. His eyes blaze with renewed anger as he confronts Rufus. He spits the words "good noble" with disdain, declaring that all nobles are nothing but filth. With a roar, he lunges, swinging his staff in a vicious arc that Rufus barely dodges. As they exchange blows, Rufus is taken aback by the villagers' surprising resilience. He starts to wonder if Foal possesses mana. The realization hits him as their combat continues. Foal is reinforcing his body with magic. Planting his foot firmly, Rufus prepares to counter. Suddenly, a monstrous dark aura erupts from Foal. Rufus can only stare in shock before a fist, charged with this strange magic, slams into his face. Over the water, 2 figures are hurled toward a wooden pier by an unseen force. Foal looks on in disbelief as Rufus unleashes a spell, shouting its name, Dark Hand. A massive, shadowy hand bursts from below, crashing into the pier and splintering the wood. Amidst the destruction, he stands, his long coat billowing as the dust and smoke clear. His moment of calm is fleeting, replaced by a flicker of annoyance as Carlos calls out to him. He thinks to himself that he was forced to use magic. He turns his attention to his butler, noticing the scrapes on the old man's face. After a brief silence, Rufus states plainly that Carlos requires healing. With a stern expression, he issues a command. More martial training must be added to his study schedule. As Rufus walks away with Greg, Carlos watches them depart, realizing his young master truly despises losing. Rufus and Greg make their way down a long wooden dock that extends over the water. As they walk, Greg apologizes for the actions of their fool, Foal. Rufus brushes off the apology, remarking that Foal is a lucky bastard. Had this occurred yesterday, he would have cleaved him in 2. He ponders something. He asks Greg if it's true that commoners, like the young men hunting monsters, can't even use magic. Greg responds with a proud grin, explaining that even without Foal, they are all capable fighters. He suggests Rufus view it as their way of thanking him for saving the village, and even offers to let Rufus take his own son on the upcoming cleanup operation if the boy is willing. The offer leaves Rufus momentarily taken aback. The man is surprised, wondering if Rufus has entered some kind of contrary tsundere mode. He tilts his head slightly, adding as an afterthought that, of course, they will be compensated for their services. The man's expression brightens instantly. With a confident wink, Greg declares that now they're talking and that he's counting on the young noble. With terms agreed upon, they continue down the wooden pier. Carlos announces their immediate departure, instructing that everyone willing to fight be put on the ships right away. Commoners already perched high on the dock's framework look down and comment on their haste. On the bustling docks, a grand sailing vessel awaits at sea. Carlos explains the mission to Rufus. The fleet is set to begin a monster cleanup operation, and its success will allow local fishing to resume. Rufus quietly agrees. A young man from the pier approaches, introducing himself as Raj, Greg's eldest son and the leader of the young men. He explains that the sea is their backyard and offers to guide them. Rufus notes internally that Rog is taller than the local magistrate. Carlos remarks to Rufus that at least Rog is better than that shark-like brat. Rufus murmurs that the brat always strikes first, prompting an irritated Carlos to demand clarification. Their conversation is interrupted by a figure blocking their path. It's Foal, the young man from the village. Raj is shocked, asking why Foal isn't back in the village. Foal glares at Rufus, calling him a damn black bean sprout and questioning if he thought he could escape. Foley grins with wild confidence, explaining that one thing led to another, and he managed to catch up to them, having apparently ridden a sea creature to the docks. He refuses to accept the outcome of their previous encounter, declaring to Rufus that their fight isn't over yet. Raj stands by, listening as Foley insists that Rufus lost by ring out. Rufus's expression darkens at the accusation. Foal vehemently argues that the shadowy hand Rufus used was a blatant violation of the rules, rendering the outcome invalid. Finding the complaint absurd, Rufus turns his gaze toward the open sea, the ship now well offshore. He coolly states that anyone who disobeys his orders is worthless and commands someone to toss the insubordinate boy overboard. Instead of showing fear, Foal breaks into a wide, toothy grin. With a laugh, he declares his full agreement with the command. The strange confidence is immediately explained as the lid of a nearby barrel flies open. A young boy, another stowaway, pops out with alarm, shouting for his big brother. His sudden appearance halts the execution of the order.